Hello, ladies and gentlemen, this is the Steven Hour, and we are doing a brand new movie series review, franchise review. As you know, soon I'll be releasing my film review, Spectre, and with that, it will be a long time before I can do any Bond films because I plan to review them once they've been released on DVD, as just something easier for me to do record and review. And with that, I need to have a franchise to keep me entertained as I don't know when a new Bond film will be coming out. And so I need to find a new film franchise. And other than Bond, I would say the next possible film franchise for me to do that I really like and have enjoyed watching is the Harry Potter series. Now, however, there is some difference. While I'm a die-hard Bond fan, Harry Potter, I'd say I'm more of a casual fan. I've seen the films, and I enjoyed every one of them. So will be fun. I'll be exploring that. Also, in many ways, even though I'm a huge fan of the Harry Potter films, I in many ways am pretty much a foreigner to this franchise. So this will be fun. I'll be diving into something very new and very different. Something that I haven't honestly done before. So with that, we're going to do the Harry Potter films. We're going to review them in order of their release. We're going to do some bit of background. We're going to get into the cast, get into the plot, my personal opinion, and how do I feel about the films. And then at the end of the franchise, at the end of all the 8 Harry Potter films, I'll then rank them. And then we get onto the Fantastic Beasts. And again, the Fantastic Beasts series, we're kind of halfway in. Who knows? Maybe I might decide, maybe at the end of the current Fantastic Beasts film, whenever in the near future, to rank all the Harry Potter films in the current Fantastic Beasts films. I might do that. Who knows? I'm not entirely sure. I might do that some point in the future. Who knows? But let's get into the very first Harry Potter film. And that is 2001's The Philosopher's Stone. So with that very long introduction out of the way, let's get to a bit of background. Now, for those who have never heard of Harry Potter, honestly, where have you been living for the rest of your life? And 2, I'll give you a quick brief. The Harry Potter film franchise are adaptations of the Harry Potter novels or books, fantasy novels written by J.K. Rowling. And around in the late 90s, it was to be soon there was always rumors of being adapted for possible film adaptations. And of course, they roundabout did. The director for this, for the first installment of the series, and then the sequel that followed, would be Chris Columbus, who, honestly, the guy had a lot on his plate. Not only did he have to adapt the first adaptation, or essentially the first novel in the long-running film franchise, but at the same time, he also had to work with, essentially, there's a lot of pressure. This was meant to be a big blockbuster. There was a lot of pressure to both please the fans, please essentially the producers and people doing the films, but also having to work with a bunch of kid actors. Interesting about this film's franchise, something that I think is rather different compared to the other film franchises in the series, or other series I do. As time go on, especially with the Bond series, the main actor got recasted. For Harry Potter, it's different. They managed to keep the same actors for the roles throughout the film's run, or the series run, with of course a few exceptions along the way, but it's essentially the same. It was distributed through Warner Brothers, and it was produced by David Heyman, and the screenplay was done by Steve Kloves, probably butchering that name. And of course, they had a lot of expectations. But the question is, and this is the first film in the franchise, so the question is, how does it do? How do I feel about it? And is it any good? Without further ado, let's get straight into the cast. The casting for this film, and for the series in general, revolves around arguably the 3 big leads throughout the series run. Harry Potter, Ron Weasley, and Hermione Granger, portrayed by Daniel Radcliffe, Robert Grint, and Emma Watson. Now, I'll be honest, for many of the kid actors, I think in the first film installment, you can definitely tell they're kid actors. They're not fully into the role yet, and it's something that I kind of notice when going on with the films. But hey, that's just me. Other beloved characters include Hagrid, Rubius Hagrid, portrayed by Robbie Coltrane, who I happen to know played, of course, Valentin Sikorsky in the Pierce Brosnan Bond films GoldenEye and The World Is Not Enough. So I find that very interesting. Other beloved characters include Albus Dumbledore, portrayed by Richard Harris. It should be noted, however, that in the later films, especially in the third installment, he'll be recasted due to the actor's unfortunate passing. But he essentially, and honestly, from what I've been told, Richard Harris portrays Dumbledore more in line with the books than other interpretations that have followed. Other characters include Professor Quirrell, portrayed by Ian Hart, Severus Snape, portrayed by Alan Rickman, and Professor McGonagall, portrayed by Maggie Smith. School teachers, 2 of the 3 will be more prevalent in the films that followed this, and I really enjoyed it. Other, of course, notable characters include Voldemort, who in this film is portrayed, I should say, more voiced by Iron Heart. A coincidence? Maybe not, we'll get later. And then, of course, we have a Hogwarts teacher of Madam Hooch, is the character's name, and it's portrayed by Zoe Wanamaker. I'm probably butchering that name. And honestly, she really just appears for this film and doesn't really come for the sequels, unfortunately. Supporting characters that have become a mainstay in the series are the Weasleys. Fred and George, the twins and sort of jokesters, are played by James and Oliver Phelps. Percy, who was at the time the oldest Percy kid in Hogwarts, and essentially is like the goody-two-shoes smart one, portrayed by Chris Racken. And here we have Molly Weasley, the mother, and Ginny, portrayed by Julia Waltz and Bonnie Wright, respectively. Other characters that become a mainstay in the series include Draco Malfoy, portrayed by Tom Felton, as essentially the school bully, and his sidekicks, Crabbe and Goyle, portrayed by Jamie Waylett and Josh Herderman. Essentially, they're just bullies to their, for the story. Other characters that would, ironically, wouldn't appear, honestly, don't appear in all the films, but appear in quite a lot of them, and that's the Dursley. Vernon, Petunia, and Dudley, portrayed by Richard Griffin, Fiona Shaw, and Harry Melling, and essentially are Harry's family because of his parents passing, and kind of are just bully and just ridicule him almost on a daily basis. Other high school characters include Seamus, Neville Longbottom, and Dean Thomas, portrayed by Matthew Lewis, Dean Murray, and Alfred Notch. Essentially, also Gryffindors, and a sort of like Harry and Ron's like best friend, like the main guy group that they hang out with. Other important characters, of course, include Harry's parents, James and Lily, and essentially play like how Batman's parents are. We don't really see them, mostly in flashbacks, or in this case, magical flashbacks, and are sort of there to really just provide context to the story. I've also found it interesting that in the first 2 films, we have a character of Sir Headless Nick, or Nearly Headless Nick, portrayed by John Cleese, who of course played R/Q in the last 2 Pierce Brosnan Bond films. So I found that quite interesting. Other characters that should be mentioned, but photos aren't present, at least of this video, include Filch, portrayed by David Bradley, who essentially is the caretaker of Hogwarts, and Warwick Davis portrays Phyllis Flitwick, essentially a teacher at Hogwarts, and he also plays other minor characters like the Goblin characters within the series. With all the cast out of the way, let's head straight into this review. Let's review with the beginning. We're beginning the film with a nice little opening that most Warner Brother films do before you actually begin the film, and then we cut to Pivot Drive, where it's dark night, the moon is out, an owl is I don't know what noise that owl makes, but it makes a noise, and we see a cat. Next thing you know, we see the lights go out with a magical device by an old man. This old man happens to be Albus Dumbledore. As he's walking around, he goes to the cat, and basically asks the cat to come out, and it's revealed this cat will shapeshift into an old lady. These characters in question are Albus Dumbledore and McGonagall, who are been spying on a particular house and are waiting for a friend Hagrid to arrive. McGonagall is skeptical of Hagrid being trusted with something this important, but Albus Dumbledore tells her that he trusts Hagrid with his life. We then see a flying motorbike in the night sky coming closer and closer to the ground. It then arrives, and the person in question is Hagrid, delivering something very important, a young little baby. It is revealed, however, that they are about to be dropping this baby off to his next of kin, the closest thing to family. McGonagall is again skeptical, saying that this child should not be in the hands of these muggles, as they are referring to these people. And as we find out lingo, muggles means essentially non-magic people. But Albus says he is the closest family and he must be away from the world for now, as it will be his safest option. They then drop this poor child at the doorstep with a letter explaining everything. And on that letter reveals everything to this family. We look at the child with the lightning bolt mark on his head. And this child, ladies and gentlemen, is Harry Potter. We then open with the classic Harry Potter theme music that has become essentially identifiable with this series. And of course the classic opening title to all the Harry Potter films, which in this case is Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone. We then keep going to see Harry Potter, who's grown up and is right about very early, I'd say 11 right about now. And we find out that he's been living at this place, the Dursleys, his next of kin family, for several years. And they've been treating him horribly, forcing him to do chores. He lives allegedly under the stairs in a very small room, badly, and he's just treated horribly by everyone. Forced to do chores, forced to cook. And it's also revealed on this day that it has to be Dudley's birthday, Harry's cousin. And Mr. and Mrs. Dudley, Mr. and Mrs. Dudley? No, Vern? Basically, Dudley's parents go all out, or the Dursleys, sorry, go all out to celebrate Dudley's big day. But he gets upset because there's not much presents as he did last year. Essentially, Dudley is a dick. And essentially is a spoiled brat. But they say they'll take him to the zoo to make up for it. But just before they go, Vernon threatens Harry, saying if Ed is in monkey business, he would not be fed for a week. And essentially, he's just treated horribly. We get an insight to just how he's been treated for several years. They then go to the zoo, but something magical happens. First, they go to a snake exhibit, but the snake's not moving. As the Dursleys move away, Harry begins talking to the snake, encouraging it, and essentially, trying to identify with the snake. As the snake was born in captivity, never got to see its parents, Harry viewed the same way. Just as Dudley sees the snake moving, he comes and pushes Harry aside. Harry gets angry, and for some magical reason, the glass wall disappears, and Dudley falls in, but the snake gets out of its habitat and starts slithering away. It stops by to Harry to say thanks, which for some reason Harry managed to understand it and said, "You're welcome," and the snake kept moving on. As Dudley got back up, he finds that the glass that had disappeared has reappeared, and he's now trapped within the exhibit. Mr. and Mrs. Dursley come and are shocked to see what happened, but Harry is quickly punished for something he didn't do. He keeps explaining that everything just happened like magic, and he can't explain it. But Dursley says there's no such thing as magic, and he's sent to his unfortunate place of a room. By the way, throughout this review, sorry my voice sounds a bit low, but I've got a very, very sore voice. The next day, or I'm assuming is the next day, an owl comes by and just happens to drop a letter to the Dursley house. Harry comes to collect the letter. It gives all the letters except one, as it's addressed to him. Dudley, however, is of course a classic case of want to center attention, steals Harry's letter, but Harry says it's for him. But when the Dursleys read the letter, it's addressed to Hogwarts, and they are shocked. We don't know, it's a bit of a mystery. For the next few scenes, they see them essentially preventing any mail or letters coming into the house. Vernon's happy when Sunday arrives as no post on Sunday. What ends up happening, however, is the place ends up filled with letters, and Harry quickly tries to steal one and runs back to his room, but is quickly stopped by Vernon, and they said they're going to go far away where they can't be found. And I like how Dudley says the line, "Daddy's gone mad, hasn't he?" We then cut to essentially this old, I guess, I'm not even sure what you call it, a shack, old abandoned historical building on an island in the middle of nowhere, where it's revealed on that day it happens to be Harry's birthday, and it shows how far they are trying to get away from these letters. Again, Harry doesn't know what's going on, and if you're watching this for the first time and never read the books, you don't know what's really going on. Eventually, however, a loud noise comes at the door, and in steps in is Hagrid from the beginning of the film, who comes in, subdues Vernon, takes the gun out of his hand, or correction, bends it to be useless, and goes to Dudley thinking that's Harry. However, Harry reveals himself, and then not only does Hagrid give Harry his birthday cake, but gives him a letter. Harry reads it, and it's revealed he's been accepted to a school of witchcraft and wizardry, and everything's explained to Harry. It turns out that Vernon and Petunia have been trying to hide the secret that he is actually a witch. He is a wizard, and his parents were witches and wizards. His mother happens to be Petunia's sister, but she doesn't have magical abilities because Petunia, well, Lily, Petunia's sister, was born into what essentially is a Muggle family, and essentially is a Muggle born. It is then revealed that his parents didn't die in a car crash, but were killed in another way. And ever since then, Harry's been forced to be living with the Dursleys. And essentially, the Dursleys agreed when they brought Harry in, they would get this magic out of his head and essentially not make him go. But Hagrid says he must go, and Vernon crosses a line when he insults Dumbledore, and Hagrid is also insulted how they've kept the secret from him and never told him, as he had every right to know. To get back at them, he fires essentially a magic wand, I'm guessing is hidden in his umbrella. It's never revealed if that's really the case, but that's what I've always thought. And essentially has a pigtail grow out of Dudley's essentially butt, and it's just a funny scene running around, and Harry goes with Hagrid saying unless he wants to stay, he gladly goes. We then go into the underground wizard world, which is fantastic, and it's just a fantastic scenery that the production team has managed to come, and really just goes how the wizarding world is secretly within London's underground, there's an underground world society within London. It's a fantastic bit, and one of my favorite bits of this movie. As they go around, essentially are shopping for Harry's items in school supplies, but Harry also knows how everyone's knowing him, but he's never met any of them. He's confused about the whole thing, and this gives him more so when he goes to Ollivanders, who is portrayed by John Hurt, who of course played the War Doctor in the Doctor Who revival series, and gets his wand. It's a great scene, and it also shows a bit about this world, how the wand chooses the witch, not a wizard, not the other way around, and he also reveals that the wand happens to have a brother that gave Harry that scar. Harry wants to know who's this guy, but all we know, they never speak his name, but he did some very bad things. Great, but bad things. Harry still doesn't know what's going on. One night, goes to Hagrid and asks him, what's going on? How does everyone know me? What happened to my parents? How do I get this scar? Hagrid then reveals everything. There was this dark wizard actually, that was essentially this uprising. There was a war, bad times. People were against him. Harry's parents were one of these people. Voldemort, the wizard in question, went to go and kill Harry's parents. But when he went to kill Harry, something happened that night. Voldemort supposedly died and left him with that scar and ended this wizarding war. That's why everyone knows Harry. He's the boy that lived, one of the very few to survive this killing curse. This killing of a dark wizard that had killed everyone in his path. And there's always rumors to what really happened to Voldemort. People say he died. Hagrid thinks that he's still alive, but barely has enough energy to move on, and is just waiting for death. After that, we then cut to essentially a train station where Hagrid is taking Harry to the train station. But not before that. They ended up going to Gringotts, essentially the wizard bank, where Harry gets his money to buy his supplies. But also Hagrid is there to pick up something else as well for Hogwarts. And this will play a bit of a role in the story and where the name of the film comes from, Philosopher's Stone. But we'll find more about that when we get to it. Harry then gets to the train platform and realizes he has to go to 9 3/4, but there is no 9 3/4. Confused on what's going on, he then notices a group of people. These happen to be the Weasleys, and as they run into a brick wall, and it turns out it's actually a transport to essentially the Hogwarts Express train. He then goes and asks how to get through, and Mrs. Weasley directs him on how to do it, and he enters. And here we see the Hogwarts Express, and it is fantastic. And realize this is going to be more magical. Harry gets on the train, and he then bumps into Ron Weasley, who asks and has to sit down as all the places are full, and a friendship is struck. Ron is surprised that the person he's meeting, and the person who become the best friend for the rest of his life, was the legendary Harry Potter. He shows the scar, and when the lolly lady comes for offers some lollies, Ron can't afford any, but Harry, loaded, buys a whole bunch, and they just snack on lollies and just talk non-stop. They are then interrupted when Hermione Granger comes in, asking if anyone's seen this missing toad. They say no. Hermione is also shocked to see Harry, and essentially leaves the part to say how they've got to quickly get in their robes as they'll be arriving shortly. Hearing that, they then arrive at Hogwarts, and Hagrid takes them, along with many first years, Neville Longbottom, Dean Thomas, Seamus, across the river into Hogwarts grounds. As they get there, and Harry get there. There are two significant moments we get introduced to a few interesting characters. One is McGonagall, just before they're about to enter, and one, Draco Malfoy, introduces himself to Harry. Harry's already had a big name. Everyone's shocked that Harry's actually come to Hogwarts. Draco tries to befriend him because he's essentially this rich aristocrat who thinks himself better than everyone because he's part of a very influential family, along with Crabbe and Goyle, who essentially are his muscles. And once he insults Ron for clearly coming from a bad family, the Weasleys, and says how some families are better, and essentially tries to befriend him. Harry doesn't befriend him and says he can sort out the bad lot for his own, and rejects his friendship. And there, a rivalry is born. All the first year students are then led into the Great Hall, where Dumbledore gives out a few announcements. Don't go into the Forbidden Forest, and don't go to a certain corridor of the castle. After that, there's the sorting ceremony. Some of the characters we already established get sorted into their houses. Draco, Crabbe and Goyle get sorted into Slytherin, and judging by what Ron says, every wizard turns out bad from that house. Seamus, Neville, Dean, Hermione, and Ron all get sorted into Gryffindor. And then there's Harry. Now, the Hat at first wants to put Harry into Slytherin, but Harry doesn't want to go there. As a result, he realizes there's only one other place for him to go. Gryffindor. After that, the feast begins, and the whole hall scene is just a fantastic set. I love everything about it. We get introduced to Sir Nearly Headless Nick. All fun. And I also like throughout the scene, Snape is just staring at Harry. Harry doesn't know what's going on with who Snape is. Even when he asks Percy who it is, Percy just says it's how Snape is the potions professor, but he's always wanted to be the head, really wants to teach the dark arts. After that, everyone is sent to their common rooms. They go into their area, and just as that, everyone's gone to bed. Harry is just at the window still looking out, realizing that he's just entered this new world, and he himself doesn't know what to expect. And in many ways, we, the audience, don't know what to expect, not just for the rest of this film, but the franchise. The next few scenes is Harry and Ron being late to essentially Professor McGonagall's class, and then we cut to Professor Snape's class of potions, and already there's a bit of a confrontation between Harry and Professor Snape. Snape already is sort of out to get Harry, and Harry doesn't know what he's done to deserve this. And we also find out a bit about our main trios, how Ron is a good guy and very loyal, but he's also not the brightest, of characters, and Hermione is an absolute intelligent one, but also tends to be a little bit goody two-shoes sometimes. Again, these characters, how these characters start off at the beginning of the series is very interesting. We then go back to the Great Hall, where it seems that essentially they're doing their homework. Whilst that's happening, they're getting like gifts and that from or like the mail sort of thing. But just as that's happening, Harry's reading the local newspaper how there was a break-in into Gringotts Bank, tried to steal something, but nothing is really that well known, and this plays a bit of a role to the story. We then move on to Harry, Ron, Hermione, and essentially the rest of the first years getting their first flying lesson. And it seems that Harry, first off, when they ask their brooms to come up and grab, Harry immediately gets his first try, something that kind of shocks Hermione. And as everyone gets on their broom, Neville suddenly flies out of control and ends up being sent to the nurse's office. Draco ends up stealing one of Neville's items that was introduced in the hall scene, this ball that helps you to remember what you've forgotten, and Harry steps up essentially to defend Neville, probably knowing it's like to be bullied by Dudley, asks Draco to get it back. Draco then flies away with it and Harry follows. Draco then throws it and Harry flies after it, catching it in front of McGonagall's essentially office, or I guess you would say office, and flies back down. McGonagall, shocked at what she's seen, goes to get Harry, but when you think about he's about to be punished, he's actually recruited to become a part of the Gryffindor Quidditch team as a seeker. And essentially we don't know what Quidditch is, and we find out a bit of Harry's parentage, how his father was actually a seeker on the Quidditch team. And again, we're finding a bit more about Harry's finding a little bit more about his parentage. There's a few scenes where they're going back to their dormitory room, but end up going to the forbidden part of the place where they come face to face with essentially a three-headed dog. They manage to get out before getting killed and get back to their dormitories, but Hermione says to not do this again as they don't want to get expelled. Harry then goes for a small little practice of Quidditch, and also Quidditch, it's like what the balls are and what his job is. A seeker is to find the small little golden ball that flies. He catches it, ends the game, and gets the highest amount of points. Which team gets the highest amount of points at the end of the game wins. And essentially, this is to really build up for the Quidditch game to be played later. And we see the Quidditch captain, who honestly really only appears in the first two installments of the series and doesn't really come back for most of the series run. Or at least the film series run. He only appears in the first two. We then get another class scene where essentially they have to learn to like have the feather float up. Hermione gets it first try and it's kind of getting on Ron's nerves. Ron then slightly mocks her behind her back, saying how she's a nightmare of a person and no wonder she's got no friends. Hermione hears this and walks away crying. Harry says, "I think she heard you." We then go back to the hall scene where it's essentially Halloween. They're having a whole bunch of candy, and whilst that's happening, Harry asks, "Where's Hermione?" And Neville says she's in the bathroom crying. And I like that little glare he gives to Ron's, like, what have you done? Eventually, Professor Quirrell comes running in, saying how the trolls escaped the dungeon. Dumbledore gets all the teachers to get all the students out, and the other half of teachers to go and face off the troll. Just as Harry and Ron are leaving, they realize Hermione's not with them and head to the bathroom to get her out, where it just so happens the troll happens to be, and ends up saving Hermione's life and defeating the troll. The teachers come in, and a few things I've noticed. The friendship between these three really form after that moment. They're given points for essentially saving Hermione, but Harry also notices that Snape is injured on his leg and is curious to what's going on. Curious to what really happened. Back in the hall, we then cut to essentially another hall scene where Snape goes and essentially to congratulate on the troll and to be prepared for this Quidditch game. Harry is suspicious of Snape and what's going on. Is there something to do with the newspaper, which was revealed for what was stolen? Maybe he's trying to get there. They don't know what's going on, but something's up. We then get to the Quidditch scene of the game, of the film, and it's arguably one of the most infamous moments or famous bits of the Harry Potter films, especially in the earlier films, these Quidditch matches. And this is a sport everyone wishes was real to play. It would be fun. But I have a few problems here with this Quidditch game. First off, nothing in execution. It's fun as hell. Harry's team Gryffindor versus Slytherin. and of course Gryffindor wins. But there's some things that also advance the story, such as the broom getting jinxed on Harry and almost killing him. Ron and Hermione end up saving him when they believe that Snape is responsible, as he's doing these kind of jinxing curses where he's going shaking back and forth, up and down, but up and down, and it provides the story. But the problem with this scene in general I tend to have is just the bad CGI. It's so dated and takes me out of the scene every time I watch it. Harry ends up catching the snitch and winning the game, essentially earning his place on not just in Gryffindor, but as a Quidditch star. We then end with Hagrid, Ron, Hermione, and Harry walking with him, telling about what they've done. And Hagrid says that Snape is helping guard this thing, and regrets telling them that, but tells them to not meddle in their affairs. We then cut to essentially winter time. It's Christmas. Hermione's going back home for Christmas, but Ron and Harry will be staying at Hogwarts. And Hermione suggests to them to go into the restricted section to find more about this, about Nicholas Flamel, as they are guarding something for Nicholas Flamel and was attached to the robbery in the beginning of the film. We then go to the Christmas, this scene in the dormitories where Ron and Harry open up Christmas presents. Ron gets a sweater, like they always do, and Harry gets an invisible cloak. Turns out it was belonged to his father and is now back in his possession, and he uses this throughout essentially most of the series installments in order for stealth and to secretly hide. He ends up going to the restricted section where he almost gets caught and sees a confrontation between Snape and Professor Quirrell. He then ends up going into a room to hide and finds this mirror. Ron comes in too. Harry is confused with the mirror as he gets to actually see his parents. Ron thinks it might be something to go into the future, as he's now head boy and head of the Quidditch team, Quidditch star, essentially everything he always wants to be. But Harry said it can't be, as his parents are dead. And it turns out for the next few nights he's been just standing in front of that mirror watching his parents. Dumbledore then comes in and explains what this is, and how many have just spent their whole lives just staring at this mirror, watching their life go by, and warns Harry not to, and essentially to comfort him, knowing obviously the pain he feels. We then go back to the library where Hermione comes in and reveals everything. Nicholas Flamel has in his possession a philosopher's stone, essentially this artifact that keeps people from living long periods of life, and this Nicholas Flamel is incredibly old. I realized that all these traps, the three-headed dog, everything is meant to guard this stone. And naturally they decide to go talk to Hagrid about it, where Hagrid does fill them in, tells them they are right, and they find out Hagrid has a dragon's egg, but he needs to quickly get rid of it, and Ron offers to help with his brother Charlie, but they are caught by Draco, who then rats them out to Professor McGonagall. The trio and Draco are given detention. Yeah, Draco too. Even though Draco did good intention, he too was caught being out of his room, and McGonagall is a person that is strict but fair. And they're given detention to go into the Dark Forest with Hagrid and Filch. The problem with this is they said that they're forbidden to the Dark Forest, yet their detention is to go into the Dark Forest. I don't know, that's something I always caught on as a kid. Anyway, the group go into the forest, and essentially a unicorn is attacked by this mysterious figure, but is saved at the last minute by this centaur, essentially half horse, half human, and the centaur, it turns out to be a friend of Hagrid, but also reveals to Harry how this person was drinking unicorn blood, which can give people life, and is a vile act to do. And essentially, this centaur saved Harry from death. And Harry realizes this mysterious figure is Voldemort, the person that killed his parents, the infamous wizard no one wants to talk about. When they get back to the dormitory, he explains everything to Hermione and Ron. However, Hermione says, even though everything makes sense to, Harry explains everything to Voldemort, it's after the stone, obviously to bring himself back. But Hermione says, don't worry, because as long as Albus Dumbledore is at Hogwarts, he will not dare enter. Throughout the whole Wizarding War, Voldemort never stood foot at Hogwarts, probably because he was scared of Dumbledore, one of the most infamous witches and wizards in the entire world. They then go to Hagrid and kind of explain who gave him the dragon's egg, and it turns out Hagrid might have accidentally slipped of how to, subdue Fluffy. The trio then go to Professor McGonagall explaining how the stone's about to be taken, and needs to inform Dumbledore, but McGonagall says that Dumbledore's away and to leave this matter alone. Just as they're realizing what's going to happen, they then make a plan to go and, prevent Snape from getting the stone, as they are convinced Snape is in league with Voldemort. Snape comes behind and says what they're talking about. They say nothing and essentially walk off, but mysterious to both parties are essentially untrustworthy to each other. The three plan to go out that night, but Neville attempts to stop them, not wanting to get Gryffindor into more trouble, but Hermione ends up subduing Neville and they go to essentially Fluffy, where it turns out Fluffy is over a trap door. And it turns out they've been using this lyre, this old musical instrument, to keep Fluffy asleep. Just so when it goes off, the dogs begin to wake up and they quickly jump in to essentially what is this, I'm guessing you call a devil's snare, but they manage to quickly get out thanks to Hermione. Just as they go forward, they find these weird looking keys in the air, kind of a half key and I would guess half, flies. Harry then knows what to do. He gets on a broom and tries to find the right key to open the door, and then Ron, Hermione quickly get in. They then go to the next part, which essentially is a live Quidditch wizard's chess, which was done early in the film, just when Hermione was about to go off for Christmas break. Ron, being an expert, they then realize they have to play, and essentially throughout the game, it goes on. Out of all the traps, this is my favorite. It always stunned me as a kid. However, Ron decides to sacrifice himself in order to checkmate the king, and he gets injured in the process. Harry, however, goes through with Ron's word and ends up winning the game. He goes further, but Hermione stays to look after Ron. Just as he gets further, he is shocked to find out the person in the room is not Snape, but is Professor Quirrell. And it turns out he was responsible for trying to kill Harry at the Quidditch game. And it turns out he let the troll loose to try and get to the stone, but Snape suspected what he was doing and tried to cut him off. Already this raises a bit of questions that will kind of get answered as the series ended. It turns out that the mirror early in the film to see what you most desire. And he wants the stone, but he can't get it. He then has Harry stand in front, but he can't get it. Well, he lies actually, as he actually gets the stone in his pocket, but he hides it. It is then revealed that Quirrell this whole time, is Voldemort, but not exactly. Voldemort has latched himself onto Quirrell in order to still stay alive, and again, he's after the stone to get a body of his own. However, Harry refuses to give the stone to Voldemort. Even when Voldemort offers to bring his parents back from the dead, he refuses no, and just when Quirrell attacks Harry, Quirrell begins to almost turn to dust. Something about the touch of Harry repelled him. Something that was kind of hinted at the beginning of the film when he first met Quirrell when he was shopping earlier in the film. Eventually, he essentially kills Quirrell, who then dies. But Voldemort manages to make his escape. Harry then wakes up in the hospital. Dumbledore reveals that Ron and Hermione are okay. Everyone in the school knows what happened down there, and he revealed why Harry got the stone, because he made it that for those who want it but not to use it can get the stone. Actually pretty smart, and I'm surprised, and actually makes a lot of sense, and is actually one of Dumbledore's better plans. It is also revealed to why Quirrell died. When he touched Harry, it turns out when Harry's mother died, he had a protection curse was placed on Harry, making that no one could harm Harry, and it was done by the most loving act that any person can do. Love. And here, Dumbledore and Harry begin to slightly bond here. Though they have kind of early in the film, I think this is where it really began, and is interesting for their characters going forward. And again, Harry meets up with Ron and Hermione, and is glad to find out that they are okay. We then end this film going to the Great Hall, where essentially is the House Cup for the most point. Gryffindor is in last place, and Slytherin's in first place. But however, Dumbledore awards a few extra points to Ron for best wizard chess, for being great at wizard chess, Hermione for an absolute intelligence, and Harry for an absolute courage and bravery. But that makes him tied with Slytherin. But Dumbledore offers points points to Neville, as even though it takes a lot of great courage to stand up to your enemies, it takes even more to stand up to your friends. So it gives extra points to Neville, which makes them win the House Cup, and it's a fun moment. And honestly, it leaves our heroes end on a happy note. We then see him go onto the Hogwarts train, about to go home. But just before Harry leaves, he's given a book by Hagrid, who reveals a family album of essentially his parents, and is a nice little, little going home present. I really love that. And again, really shows that Hagrid really formed a bond, not just with Harry, but the trio. But then go away how saying how this is going to be their life now, this is going to be weird, and they can't wait for the next adventure. Essentially, it's telling the audience that there will be more films, and you're going to enjoy every moment of it. And honestly, I can't disagree with that. And that's where we end the first ever Harry Potter film. Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone is often regarded as honestly one of the best films in the franchise, and is often considered a great film to start off any film franchise with. However, and I can agree to that to some aspects. The world that was introduced here would set the stage for the rest of the films to follow, and just as the characters learning more about this world, we learn with it. And again, I love this world is introduced, and it's definitely a different kids fantasy film that I've seen, and I don't think any other kid fantasy film based off like a literature that has like a kid or teen fandom will ever compete with this film. Maybe The Hunger Games will be a strong contender, but I feel this film has a lot in common with the James Bond's Dr. No, and the fact that I consider this first film, even though great, also becomes a bit vanilla with the other films to follow. Now, I don't hate this film, I really like it, but I'll be honest, every time I'm always re-watching Harry Potter films, The Philosopher's Stone is the one I'm always coming back to least, and the reason is because it's a bit too kid-friendly. Don't get me wrong, there's action, but I'll be honest, the other films that provided on action, I think always step it up a notch, making this one feel kind of in comparison. I'm also not a fan of a lot of the CGI here. It feels very dated, and it can really just show just how it was with the time. Even Christopher Columbus, who directed this film, wasn't a fan of the CGI. And the kids in this film, like the kid actors, all do reasonably well, but I don't feel they don't come into their own until the sequel. Other supporting characters are great in their first outing, and are really delights to watch in the films to follow. Another thing I also find about this film is I think it's a bit too kid friendly, it's maybe a bit light, and almost too light. But then again, the film was directed at kids, and in many ways, as the series went on, the characters we watch grow up, and technically, as that's going, the audience who watched the first film grow up with the films. So I can't really say it is necessarily a bad film. I can't really say that in all good conscience. But I'll be honest, every time I'm a rewatch, this is always the film I'm coming back to least. It's not at the bottom of the barrel of what I consider is the my least favorite film of the series, but I will admit it is somewhere either down the bottom or even in the middle. But it is a good film to start off a franchise, and I don't want to hit this film too bad because it is a good film and it's a stunning film. But like I said, it's a film I'm always coming back to least, probably because it is a bit too kid friendly. But then again, it is directed at kids, so maybe the age demographic I'm supposed to be watching at this film is kind of not there. And honestly, when I was watching the first two installments as a kid, even The Philosopher's Stone was a film I was always coming back to least. I don't want to beat this film, as it is good. All the Harry Potter films are great in their own right and offer something different. And honestly, this is a film I'm coming back to least. I don't know. If there's a reason why, if any people feel the same, please write down in the comments. But honestly, this is a film I'm always coming back to least. But I can enjoy this film for the magical world it's set up, and for the other films installments to follow would build on from this first adventure. There we have it. That was Harry Potter, The Philosopher's Stone, the first film in the franchise. The film was released again in 2001 and did quite well at the box office. It had a budget of $125 million at the time and earned over $1 billion, becoming one of the highest grossing films of that era, of the time, and is often regarded as one of the highest grossing films of the franchise, and really set the stage on how Harry Potter was to become a big film franchise from going on. Because the film was such a huge success, they had to naturally follow with the sequel. So the next film to follow up this would be Harry Potter and the Chamber of Secrets, which will be the next film to review in this series. So until next time, this has been the Steven Hour, and so long for now, and have a magical night.